It started as a dream, a modest house we could finally call our own. But when the original owner died, her greedy heirs tried to snatch it from under us, ignoring promises and exploiting loopholes. We knew we couldn't let that happen. Before I tell you how we outsmarted a greedy landlord and saved our family home, hit that like button and subscribe. If you've ever faced injustice or been underestimated, this story will inspire you. The house had never been much to look at. Cracked tiles, a kitchen that seemed to sigh with despair, and drains that whispered their own kind of horror. But for my best friend and her husband, it was a sanctuary. 5 kids, endless responsibilities, and a frozen rent that allowed them to scrape together each week. They had turned that rundown property into a home. The old owner, wealthy yet generous, had promised them the chance to buy it when the time came. For 5 years, they saved every cent, careful and diligent. Each penny they tucked away was a promise they believed in, a promise that the dream of owning their home wasn't out of reach. They trusted her. They believed in her word. Then, in a cruel twist of fate, the old lady passed away. Everything felt suddenly fragile, suspended in uncertainty. The new owners heard for adult children stepped in, polite smiles masking the gleam of greed in their eyes. They assured us it would all go through eventually, but the clock was ticking, and the weight of expectation was crushing. Probate dragged on, but my friends acted in good faith. They stripped wallpaper, painted walls, and imagined a life that belonged to them. Every brushstroke was a declaration of hope, but hope can be a dangerous thing when you're dealing with people who see it as leverage. When the estate finally allowed the sale to proceed, the rug was pulled out from under them. The price had been raised by $80,000 overnight. No warning, no negotiation, just greed made manifest. They had no way to secure a loan in a week. The open house loomed, a ticking time bomb set to detonate their dreams. Panic settled in my friends' chests. They were caught between a wall of financial reality and a cliff of potential eviction. Every hour the property remained unsold tightened the vice. Their sleep was interrupted by nightmares of moving boxes in alleys, of rent going up beyond their reach, of losing the sanctuary they had poured heart and soul into. I felt that anger immediately, visceral and hot. The wealthy heirs had no need for another $20,000 each. They were already sitting on piles of inherited wealth. Their actions were pure spite, pure greed, and I refused to accept it. I couldn't change what they had done, but I could influence what would happen next. Every night, I lay awake imagining scenarios, each more satisfying than the last. I pictured the open house, a parade of wealthy buyers glancing at a property that suddenly seemed unwelcoming, off-putting, almost cursed. I began to plan carefully. Every detail mattered: smell, appearance, neighborhood atmosphere, energy, and even the psychological manipulation of prospective buyers. We needed the house to repel every potential buyer who might outbid my friends, but we had to do it without making them appear incompetent. Every action had to be deliberate, subtle, and devastatingly effective. I knew instinctively that the smallest oversight could ruin everything. This was no longer just a fight for property, it was a battle for justice. Our first target was the visual impression. We moved furniture to awkward angles, borrowed oversized ornaments, and hung motorcycle memorabilia all over the walls. The effect was immediate. The house looked cramped, cluttered, and almost unlivable. The space my friends had loved was now intimidating to outsiders. Next, we addressed smell. A head of cabbage boiled on the stove, ammonia sprayed around doorways, and 24 rotten eggs poured into the drains. The stench was powerful but tolerable for those who knew the house, unbearable for potential buyers. Every inhale was a test of resilience, and we knew it would work. The neighborhood needed attention too. A moldy couch placed thoughtfully in front of a neighbor's yard, noisy cars circling the block, and friends from the rugby club showing up in loud rough attire combined to create an aura of chaos. The street was alive, but not in a way that suggested comfort or charm. We coordinated carefully. Each neighbor knew their role, each sound and smell meticulously placed. Every open house guest would encounter confusion and mild frustration, but never suspicion of sabotage. We became invisible directors of a theater of subtle deterrence. By the day of the open house, the street was buzzing with activity. Loud motorcycles, raucous laughter, and the smell of cabbage and rotten eggs mingled in the air. Guests entered cautiously, hoping for a glimpse of potential, but every sensory cue screamed otherwise. It was like stepping into an alternate reality, a home that was not ready for the real world. People lingered for a few minutes, their eyes narrowing, bodies stiffening, One brave potential buyer tried to make conversation with a neighbor, only to learn of recurring drain issues and frequent neighborhood chaos. Every comment was a nail in the coffin of their interest. Hours passed. Most visitors left within moments of entering, quietly muttering concerns about the smell, the clutter, the neighborhood, and the odd energy that seemed to pulse from the house itself. None placed an offer, none dared. Finally, only my friends remained, offering an offer just above what they had initially hoped. The anti-gazumping laws protected them, and the greedy heirs had no recourse. Even when a new buyer later offered $30,000 more, the house was already legally theirs. The look on the heirs' faces would have been priceless if we had been there to see it. It was glorious. Justice had been served not with confrontation, but with patience, creativity, and precise action. The heirs, blinded by greed, had never anticipated the ingenuity of those they sought to exploit. We had leveraged their arrogance against them. In the aftermath, my friends moved forward, secure in their home and in the knowledge that standing firm and planning wisely can turn even the most desperate situation into triumph. They celebrated not just a property victory, but a moral one. Having retained integrity while the greedy lost face, I reflected on the power of patient, calculated revenge. It was not malicious, it was restorative, correcting an imbalance that could not have been addressed otherwise. Every sensory detail, every distraction, every rotten egg had been part of a larger orchestration of justice. And yet, there was satisfaction in the subtlety. None of it needed to be violent or confrontational. The house, the smell, the neighborhood chaos, all were tools in a symphony of strategic retaliation that achieved its goal flawlessly. Weeks later, when my friends finally settled in and unpacked, the relief was palpable. The children ran through rooms that had been a source of anxiety for months. The house was theirs in every sense that mattered. Every detail of the ordeal faded behind laughter and everyday life. I stood back quietly, knowing that while the heirs would always remember their failure, my friends would only remember their triumph. The emotional weight lifted, leaving pride, satisfaction, and the rare sweetness of justice achieved in silence. It was a lesson in resilience, creativity, and moral courage, that sometimes the greatest victories come not from wealth or power, but from patience, intellect, and a refusal to be bullied. The days leading up to the open house were a blur of tension and nervous energy. My friends barely slept, their minds racing with every possible scenario. Could someone bypass our careful planning? Could the heirs find a loophole, a technicality, or a buyer who wouldn't be deterred? Every knock on the door, every phone call, sent a spike of adrenaline through their veins. The weight of potential loss pressed down, a physical ache that followed them from the kitchen to the bedrooms. I spent long nights pacing the floors with them, sketching out plans, refining each detail. Every cabbage leaf, every rotten egg, every strategic placement of furniture was scrutinized and re-scrutinized. I could hear their doubts in the silence between conversations, the quiver in their voices, the tired lines etched into their faces. My own hands shook sometimes, not from fear but from anticipation, the thrill of meticulous orchestration, balanced with the fear that one misstep could undo everything. Their children sensed the tension too. The eldest, a quiet boy with a knack for observation, asked questions that cut straight to the heart of our anxiety. Why is that couch there? Why is the smell so strong? Their innocence made the stakes feel heavier. If we failed, it wasn't just my friends who would suffer, it was an entire family whose life had been built around that modest home. I tried to reassure them, but inside, my mind spun through every contingency, every possible disaster scenario. The heirs themselves made the situation worse, showing up unpredictably, their smug smiles and casual threats dripping with wealth and entitlement. "I hope you've managed to get your financing in order," one of them sneered over the phone, voice heavy with condescension. Each call was a dagger, each voicemail a reminder of the greed we were up against. Their confidence was infectious. They assumed we were desperate, that the stress would crack our resolve. We encountered obstacles at every turn. The plumbing misbehaved in inconvenient ways, amplifying the sewer stench we'd engineered. The cabbage sometimes boiled over, filling the kitchen with a choking aroma that even we struggled to endure. Neighbors complained about the motorcycle noises, forcing delicate negotiations to keep them on our side. Every day was a delicate balancing act between chaos and control, each misstep potentially unraveling months of preparation. But meanwhile, my friend struggled with "Maybe we can't do this," my friend whispered one night. exhaustion heavy in her tone. Maybe we need to just pay the new price. I felt my own heart pound. The thought of surrendering was unbearable. We had come too far. We had planned too meticulously. There was no turning back. I reminded them quietly, firmly, that patience and strategy were our weapons and that giving up now would hand victory to the greedy heirs. We refined our psychological tactics, considering how a buyer would feel stepping into a space that looked intentionally uninviting. Every sensory cue was deliberate. The smell, the clutter, the noise. It had to be enough to unsettle without being suspicious. I imagined myself as a potential buyer, walking through the house, weighing its flaws. The more vivid the scenario in my mind, the more effective our execution would be. Tensions escalated further when a distant relative of the heirs made inquiries. Their interest could disrupt our plan, but thankfully, their visit was brief and polite, leaving only minor traces of concern. Even so, the incident reminded us that our control over the situation was fragile. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, with the chasm of failure yawning beneath us. Financial pressure compounded the stress. The mortgage, the deposit, the legal fees, they all loomed like dark clouds. My friend's patience was being tested not only by the heirs' greed but by the reality of their own limited resources. Every moment spent worrying about the numbers was a moment that threatened to distract from the plan itself. We had to compartmentalize fear and action with surgical precision. Sleep became scarce. Nights were punctuated by restless tossing, imagining worst-case scenarios. Would the heirs find another buyer? Would the open house attract someone who ignored the sensory chaos? Every hypothetical twist of fate played out in vivid detail in our minds, keeping adrenaline high and morale precariously balanced. The mental and physical toll was enormous, yet the thought of eventual justice kept us moving forward. As the open house approached, we rehearsed contingencies. If someone lingers too long in the living room, we'll subtly mention the drains. I would say, if they ask about the street, point to the noisy motorcycles and the neighbor's BBQ. Each rehearsal was a small reassurance. Claim uncertainty in a situation fraught with uncertainty. My friends began to see that, despite the stress, we had prepared as meticulously as possible. The day before the open house, we tested every element. Cabbage was boiled, ammonia sprayed, rotten eggs secured. Furniture was positioned at the exact angles that maximized discomfort without seeming haphazard. Motorcycle enthusiasts confirmed their arrival schedules. Even the weather cooperated. Gray, overcast skies created a mood of subtle unease. We were ready, but nerves crackled like static in every room. On the morning of the open house, our hearts raced with anticipation. I could hear the engines rumbling, the smell of cabbage and eggs permeating every corner. My friends' children peeked nervously around corners, sensing both excitement and tension. Every footstep on the creaking floors was a drumbeat of potential doom or triumph. We held our breath collectively, knowing the heirs' window of greed was about to meet our carefully laid trap. The first visitors arrived, faces bright with expectation, stepping into a home that immediately unsettled them. Their polite smiles faltered as they wrinkled noses, shifted awkwardly, and whispered to one another. It was working. Our psychological manipulation, the fruit of sleepless nights and careful orchestration, was taking hold exactly as intended. Some buyers lingered only briefly, making murmured excuses and departing quickly. Others tried to mask their discomfort but couldn't hide glances at the cluttered furniture, the strange odors, or the street that seemed alive with chaos. The atmosphere was electric, a subtle but undeniable push toward rejection. Each moment reinforced the plan and validated our sleepless, tense preparation. As more visitors arrived, the chaos of motorcycles, neighborly BBQ, and general sensory overload reached a crescendo. Guests' movements became hesitant, their conversations sparse. My friends' faces reflected a combination of nervous anticipation and cautious optimism. We had created an environment where the greedy heirs' ambition could not thrive, where every prospective buyer became an instrument of deterrence. A particularly brave buyer tried to linger, asking questions about the drains and the street noise. My friend answered with a polite but casual explanation, referencing neighborhood quirks and maintenance challenges. The buyer's enthusiasm visibly dimmed. The house that had once been desirable now seemed like a labyrinth of inconvenience. Hours dragged on, each tick of the clock intensifying both anxiety and hope. Every visitor who left reinforced the plan's effectiveness. My friends whispered small words of reassurance to one another, each departure a tiny victory in a long, tense battle. The mental strain was palpable, yet the triumph felt close enough to touch. Even as we executed the plan flawlessly, my mind kept spinning through contingencies. What if a buyer ignored everything and made an offer anyway? What if the heirs attempted to intervene? Each thought was a minor storm, reminding me that even perfect strategy requires vigilance until the very end. By mid-afternoon, it became clear the strategy had succeeded. No offers had been placed. The heirs' potential for profit had been neutralized, and my friends were positioned to reclaim their home. Relief mingled with lingering tension, a delicate balance between exhaustion and triumph. Finally, the last visitors trickled out. The house was quiet again, the smells still present, the furniture still awkwardly positioned. My friends exhaled collectively, realizing the gravity of what we had accomplished. The heirs had been outmaneuvered, and the open house had become a stage for poetic justice. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal conversations, mortgage adjustments, and family celebrations. My friends signed the papers, secured their deposit, and officially became owners. The heirs were powerless, unable to gazump or interfere. The sense of vindication was intoxicating. Looking back, the struggle leading up to the open house was as intense as the victory itself. The sleepless nights, constant planning, an emotional roller coaster had forged a meticulous strategy that paid off in the end. Every obstacle had been a test of resilience and resolve. Justice, in this case, was not immediate or simple. It was hard-fought, requiring patience, creativity, and unwavering determination. The struggle itself became part of the triumph, amplifying the satisfaction of victory. After the exhausting but successful open house, we knew the heirs would never see it coming. Their greed had blinded them, and we had turned their ambition into our advantage. But the real work was not just about victory, it was about ensuring that nothing could undo the leverage we had gained. I felt a thrill of control I had never experienced before, a careful and deliberate power that made the long months of preparation feel worth every sleepless night. The first step was observation. We tracked the heirs subtly, learning their routines, their weak spots, and the ways they flaunted their wealth. I noted their complacency, the arrogance in their daily interactions, the casual confidence that they could always get what they wanted. Each observation was like gathering ammunition, every detail a bullet in the chamber for the moment when we would strike again. I realized early on that patience was the key. This wasn't a quick hit, it was a marathon. Any sign of desperation on our part could tip them off. My friends, exhausted but exhilarated, had to maintain appearances of normalcy, paying bills, attending work, managing children while we executed a meticulous psychological strategy. It was a delicate dance, each step choreographed to avoid suspicion while positioning ourselves for ultimate advantage. Next came the planning of contingencies. What if the heirs tried to sway potential buyers with bribes or incentives? What if a rogue buyer ignored the chaos and made an offer anyway? Each scenario was weighed, countered, and rehearsed. I felt like a chess master playing a game several moves ahead, anticipating reactions before they occurred. This level of anticipation kept adrenaline high, making the mundane moments coffee breaks. School drop-offs feel like tactical pauses in a larger operation. That we also refined our environmental strategy. The cabbage, ammonia, and rotten eggs had worked perfectly for the open house, but repetition could be risky. I suggested subtle variations for future interactions. Strategically timed odors, temporary disarray, controlled neighborhood disturbances. Each adjustment was a small refinement, a calibration to maximize psychological discomfort without appearing deliberate. Communication was crucial. My friends and I developed a code system, small phrases and gestures that allowed us to convey complex ideas in seconds without tipping off anyone around us. The children even played a part, innocently reinforcing the illusion of normal domesticity while our plan continued behind the scenes. The synergy of family and friends became a force multiplier, amplifying both reach and subtlety. I also monitored the property market closely. Understanding trends, buyer behavior, and typical pricing fluctuations allowed us to anticipate the heirs' next moves. Knowledge became a weapon, the kind that doesn't announce itself but delivers decisive blows when used correctly. Each email from potential buyers or inquiries from real estate contacts was analyzed for psychological cues, giving us insight into the likely responses to our strategic environment. Meanwhile, we managed internal doubts, My friends occasionally questioned whether our methods were too extreme, whether we were risking reputation or credibility. I reminded them of the stakes: a family home, years of savings, and the sheer injustice of being undermined by greed. Framing our actions as defensive and corrective rather than spiteful helped maintain morale and kept nerves steady. There were close calls. One day, a curious neighbor almost uncovered our setup, asking pointed questions about the strange smells and clutter. Quick thinking, a friendly smile, and a plausible story about household renovations diffused the situation. Each near miss tested our resolve, forcing us to tighten security, refine cover stories, and reinforce the need for operational discipline. We also began subtle psychological manipulation of the heirs themselves. Casual mentions of legal consultation, hints at potential scrutiny of property records, and veiled comments about buyer interest created a cloud of uncertainty over their heads. They were unaware of the source, but the tension was evident in their body language during phone calls and meetings. The seeds of doubt, once planted, grew steadily into anxiety. Coordination with neighbors became increasingly sophisticated. We enlisted allies to contribute to noise, visual clutter, and general unpredictability without revealing our full plan. People became unwitting actors in our narrative, reinforcing our orchestrated chaos in ways that appeared organic. The interplay between environment and perception was critical. It was not just about what the heirs saw, but how they interpreted it. I spent late nights reviewing every communication we'd had with the heirs, every detail of their promises, and every step of their arrogance. Patterns emerged. They were predictably greedy, predictably impatient, and predictably dismissive of anyone they perceived as beneath them. Recognizing these predictable flaws became the cornerstone of our planning, allowing us to exploit them systematically. Financially, we ensured that my friends' resources were allocated strategically. Deposits, minor renovations, and emergency funds were positioned to maximize leverage without drawing unnecessary attention. Every dollar was a tool, every expenditure a calculated move. The combination of psychology, environment, and resource management gave us a multi-dimensional advantage. The next step involved timing. We selected precise moments to implement minor disruptions, to hint at unpredictability, and to seed doubt. Each carefully timed action increased the perceived risk for potential buyers and eroded confidence in the heirs' ability to manage the sale. Timing became almost ritualistic, a blend of intuition and empirical observation that required patience and discipline. By now, my friends had regained a sense of control. Where once they were desperate, anxious, and uncertain, they were now active participants in a strategy that was meticulously mapped. Confidence replaced fear, and every successful reinforced their belief that the system could be navigated with intelligence and creativity. We rehearsed responses to potential interference. If a real buyer ignored our cues, we would emphasize the drains or street activity. If a neighbor inadvertently revealed too much, we had cover stories ready. Redundancy was our friend. No single failure could derail the operation. The sense of preparation became a psychological anchor, stabilizing nerves and reinforcing commitment to the plan. Even as we refined the strategy, I reminded my friends of the stakes. This was not just a house. It was years of effort, savings, and emotional investment. Every detail mattered. Complacency could undo months of work in an instant. The weight of responsibility was immense, yet exhilarating. We also monitored legal boundaries closely. Everything had to be effective, yet defensible. We couldn't afford to cross a line that would empower the heirs to challenge the process. The planning required a delicate balance between disruption and legality. Psychological leverage and tangible outcomes. Days became a blend of anticipation and minor adjustments. We tracked visitors, refined odors, and monitored neighborhood activity. The house itself became a tool, a canvas for our orchestrated chaos. Each room, a tactical element designed to influence perception. We even rehearsed emotional reactions. My friends practiced appearing calm, polite, and welcoming to visitors while subtly reinforcing discomfort. The performance aspect was crucial. A slip of the tongue or an unnatural response could raise suspicion. Every interaction became a calculated maneuver in the larger psychological game. Finally, the moment approached when our planning would meet execution. We reviewed every aspect one last time: the odors, the furniture, the distractions, and the timing. Confidence had replaced anxiety. Exhaustion had not diminished clarity. It had sharpened focus. The stage was set. The pieces were in place, and the heir's hubris was about to be confronted with meticulous strategy. The morning of the final open house arrived like a storm. I could feel tension crackling in the air, my friends moving through the house with quiet purpose. The strategically placed furniture, the lingering smells of cabbage and ammonia, and the subtle chaos outside had all been rehearsed to perfection. Every glance, every small sound, was an instrument in the symphony of psychological disruption we had composed. Visitors arrived, one by one, faces bright with hope and curiosity, quickly dimming as the house revealed its carefully orchestrated flaws. The rotten eggs aroma hit first, followed by the odd mixture of cabbage and ammonia, subtle yet pungent. Guests, wrinkled noses, exchanged confused glances, and whispered in hushed tones. Every reaction validated months of careful planning, every expression a tiny victory against the heir's arrogance. Outside, the neighborhood activity amplified the impression of disorder. Motorcycles rumbled past, a makeshift BBQ drew attention, and a crowd of friendly, loud rugby players mingled casually, creating a spectacle that added layers of unease. Potential buyers' focus fractured, the house becoming more than just unappealing, it was chaotic, unpredictable, and unmanageable in their eyes. My friends played their roles flawlessly. Polite smiles, casual explanations, and subtle nods toward inconveniences reinforced the narrative. Yes, the drains can be tricky sometimes, one would say lightly, and the street can get noisy now and then, especially with weekend events. Visitors nodded, the tiny hesitations snowballing into full-blown doubts. Each interaction nudged them away, confirming our design. The heirs were oblivious, brimming with confidence that anyone would pay the inflated price. Calls from them became increasingly strained as hours passed. "We're just checking in," one heir said, voice tight, unaware of the chaos reigning within their precious property. "Everything is going smoothly, right?" I could almost hear the panic building as our plan unfolded exactly as intended. Some visitors lingered longer, trying to mask discomfort, but subtle cues at smell, the street noise, and the odd clutter began to erode patience. Each conversation became a tug-of-war between desire and instinctive caution, the house itself subtly dictating decisions. The psychological manipulation was complete. The property had become a masterful instrument of deterrence. A few brave buyers attempted to explore the property thoroughly, but the combination of sensory overload and neighborly disruption discouraged further interest. Every step they took seemed heavier, every glance more uncertain. My friend's controlled demeanor, juxtaposed with the chaotic environment, intensified the effect. Like a calm eye in a storm of discomfort. It was clear no serious offers would be made by outsiders. The heir's dreams of a windfall were collapsing. Calls to agents seeking interest were met with polite but firm refusals. The meticulously laid trap had succeeded beyond expectation. Relief and satisfaction mingled in my chest as I watched the heirs unknowingly walk into the consequences of their own greed. The final visitor, a curious but ultimately unwilling buyer, departed with an awkward smile and a polite excuse. The house had effectively eliminated competition, leaving my friends as the only viable purchaser. Months of preparation, sleepless nights, and psychological warfare had led to this precise moment. Victory was imminent. Legal paperwork followed swiftly. My friends signed the contracts, paid the agreed deposit, and officially secured ownership. The heirs had no recourse. The anti-gazumping laws were absolute. The sense of justice was overwhelming, a tangible counterbalance to months of stress and uncertainty. Their greed, which had seemed untouchable, had been neutralized by strategy, planning, and ingenuity. News of the heirs' frustration spread quietly through social channels. Friends and family shared the story in hushed excitement, highlighting the cleverness of the maneuver and the poetic justice of their thwarted plans. It became a quiet legend among our circles, a testament to patience, intelligence, and moral persistence. My friends were ecstatic, their relief palpable. Years of worry, budgeting, and fear were replaced with security, pride, and the simple joy of knowing their home was finally theirs. Their children, too, felt the shift. Playful energy returned, laughter filled the rooms, and the house transformed from a battlefield into a sanctuary. The heirs, meanwhile, were left to grapple with their folly. Their arrogance, impatience, and greed had been exploited by careful planning and thoughtful execution. The collapse of their plans, the thwarting of expected profit, and the loss of potential buyers served as a stark reminder that wealth alone cannot substitute for strategy or foresight. I remember the quiet moment after everything was settled, standing in the freshly painted kitchen, surrounded by friends who had endured months of stress. I felt an intense mix of relief, satisfaction, and awe at the orchestration. Justice had been served, not through confrontation or aggression, but through careful planning, creativity, and moral persistence. The house became more than a home, it became a symbol of perseverance, intelligence, and triumph over injustice. My friends often reflect on those weeks with a mix of incredulity and pride, marveling at how a family with limited resources could outmaneuver individuals of immense wealth. On the end, the lesson was clear: patience, strategic thinking, and moral clarity can overturn even the most intimidating obstacles. Greed blinds people, and arrogance provides openings for those willing to act wisely. The experience transformed not only my friends' lives but mine as well, instilling a deep appreciation for the power of careful, deliberate action. Looking back, the taste of victory was sweeter than I could have imagined. Months of tension and planning culminated in a moment of absolute triumph. The house was theirs, the heirs' schemes were thwarted, and justice, in its most satisfying form, had been served. Even years later, the story resonates as a case study in the art of patient, strategic revenge. It is a reminder that intelligence, creativity, and moral persistence can level the playing field, even when confronted with wealth and power. The planning, struggle, and execution were as instructive as the outcome itself. The neighborhood, once a scene of orchestrated chaos, returned to normalcy. Yet the echoes of that open house lingered, whispered in conversation, and remembered fondly by those who had been part of the plan. The subtle artistry of our approach became part of local lore, a testament to the effectiveness of strategy over raw wealth. My friends now live in the house with a sense of pride and ownership deeper than mere legal possession. Every corner reflects months of careful planning, a quiet triumph over adversity and injustice. The smell of cabbage and ammonia has faded, but the memory of the victory lingers, a testament to their perseverance. On reflection, the experience was transformative. It demonstrated the value of patience, the importance of meticulous planning, and the undeniable power of moral righteousness combined with strategic action. The house was more than shelter, it was a monument to cleverness, courage, and resilience.